In the late 1960s, 11-year-old Virginia Campbell, living on a farm in Ireland, relocated to 19 Park Crescent, Sawhey, Clackmannanshire, with her sister Margaret and mother. A few days later, poltergeist phenomena began to occur. Among them were a heavy wardrobe waddled across the room, followed later by a linen chest which started to rock, then rose in the air and moved towards Virginia, almost toppling over as it did so, then moved back again. When both Virginia and Margaret ran down the stairs from their bedroom in fright following loud banging from the headboard of Virginia's bed, they were followed by a noise like a bouncing ball. A Brillo pad floated eerily from the kitchen into the living room. There followed more rapping noises, again focused on the headboard of Virginia's bed, then footsteps on the bedroom floor. When Virginia was fast asleep in bed, her pillow rotated 50 degrees, and the pillow next to her took on the indentation of a human head. This was followed by another shape in her bed, this time of a complete human body. When she went to the nearby school, the strange effects followed. School books flew away from her, her school desk kept opening and closing rapidly despite her efforts to stop it. The teacher, Miss Stewart, alarmed, asked Virginia to go and see the head teacher, but was horrified when she left the classroom. The door was left wide open and it took the combined efforts of herself and 3 children to close it. Later, when Virginia walked up to the teacher, sitting at her desk, Miss Stewart's blackboard pointer began to vibrate. The vibration then transferred to the teacher's desk, which rose a few centimeters from the floor, turned 90 degrees before settling back. Many hollow objects, resonant cavities, like old school desks, jars, ornaments, wine glasses, etc., I have found, are involved in these infestations. A physicist and university lecturer, Alan Robert George Owen, investigated. This is part of his tape recording of one event of Virginia, obviously terrified of the loud rapping, apparently from a discarnate spirit, although, as you will discover, there is no spirit involved in this case. There is a perfectly plausible, albeit unusual, explanation. Dr. Logan, one of a team doing a service of blessing in the house, said in an interview that he saw her bed covers rippling, then to his astonishment her quilt appeared to change color from green to red. This was corroborated later by a young lad who lived nearby who saw a similar occurrence. There follows a possible explanation on this strange effect later. I used Google Earth to find that her house was at the end of a row of houses, excellent resonant cavities which, I believe, are the signature of this type of energy. Drawing a line down the roof ridges of the houses and projecting it to the east, expecting to find a nearby burial ground as I had done in the past at other infestations, I was a bit nonplussed to find nothing of interest, so I extended the line and was intrigued when my mouse pointer hovered over a tiny white circle. Instantly, everything fell into place. This was the Royal Air Force radar station at Bellotto, near Kinross, pumping out over 200 kilowatts of power across the country. My earliest investigation to poltergeist phenomena was in the City Price's shop in Crieff, which was next to St. Michael's Old Church and burial ground and had a series of events for decades, one being of an old man caught on camera on several occasions who was, according to a medium who visited, the keeper of this old inn and endlessly walked through the window, originally the entrance, turned left and through a door to his room upstairs. I was astonished at this, as I had found a black line of energy coming through that window and into the wall where the door once was. Neither the medium nor myself knew about that door, now bricked up and invisible. You can find more information in my website leylinesexplained.com. I had previously discovered that all the old churches in my area had been carefully aligned to ancient sites to pick up a form of energy, transmitting it down their roof ridges, so I tried the row of houses in Park Crescent which I thought might act in much the same way, modifying and amplifying it, with Virginia, starting puberty, acting as a trigger. Here you can see 2 of the modern local churches down roof ridges to ancient sites. I will be making another film of this shortly. This is the new St. Michael's Church. And this is the South Church, both aligned to other churches, burial grounds and even a standing stone at Stonefield Farm, which is connected to an ancient Bronze Age burial ground nearby. This has 28 or 29 boulders around its circumference, attracting fingers of energy from the nearby standing stone. I spent several months during one blazing hot summer, following these waves with my simple divining rod. Most scientists are skeptical about this ancient art, but it is the method our ancestors used to find, amplify and manipulate natural earth energies to build the megalith's ley line system, and it is the only way it will be recovered. I was intrigued when I discovered that over the millennia one boulder had rolled down a few meters but still attracted its share of telluric energy. The number of waves in this instance must surely mean that this site is associated with the moon. There must have been a hidden and lost knowledge of the early church, as the south church has its gable end aligned to its manse, which had occasional poltergeist effects. You can also see in this illustration to the right of the south church, a link to the grave of a presumed warrior at the village of Gilmerton. He had a flint arrowhead embedded in his skeleton. It has long been thought that this grave belonged to Coombe Hale, father of Fionn MacCool, hero chiefs of the hunter-warrior clan. Both were noted for their bravery, strength, wisdom and leadership, and led a band of noble and faithful warriors known as the Fianna. Their 9,000 warriors defended the innocence of both Scotland and Ireland during the early Iron Age and featured heavily in ancient Gaelic verse. They are associated with a number of massive forts around Scotland, many in nearby Glen Lyon, obviously built by a master race, which has perplexed historians, as they have a thick outer wall 107 feet, 33 meters, also an inner wall, 80 feet, 24 meters. To the north of Crieff, at the peaceful Loch of Glen Turret behind this fisherman, is the remains of one of their iron foundries, Rinacardich, which smelted local metal and took it down to Lochurler to the west of Crieff to be fashioned into armor for the Fianna. This is a small piece of smelted metal I found many years ago at that site. Now Fionn, sometimes called Fingal, who gave his name to the beautiful Fingal's Cave, stands in a lost cave in Skye, surrounded by his warriors, awaiting the clarion call to return and save his country. A man, benighted in a wild storm, according to legend, did enter this vast cave with its walls receding into the darkness, and saw Fingal standing there, head and shoulders above his 12 knights, with his huge shield and spear as tall as a sapling, still waiting. Waiting. But, in truth, it never had anything to do with the ancient warriors. It is much older, belonging to the Bronze Age. All churches here in Crieff are aligned to ancient sites, sometimes old churches placed carefully on top of geological fissures and surrounded by their burial grounds, and several to circles of graves, as we have already seen. But there is one notable case from a modern church to Caligula's obelisk standing outside the Vatican, 1,990 kilometers distant, but this will have to wait, as it will be my next YouTube film. There have been, of course, poltergeist activity in the distant past, and it is likely that they have been caused by a form of ley line, not from standing stones, which are straight channels of energy traversing the country, impervious to the terrain, but from a similar type of menhir, boulders, adorned with cup marks, sometimes called petroglyphs, which tend to contour hills and have to be enticed over them by judiciously placed lochs or lakes, or by using natural ones as a base. Here is the top view of such a boulder on Connaughton Farm in front of the Fulford Inn, in the Sma Glen, near Crieff, which has been placed in an amphitheatre, a flat area of ground which has obviously been sculpted for the purpose of projecting the energy of this boulder, as it has been carefully situated above and takes its energy from the Highland Boundary Fault. This illustration shows a spiral of energy, a shape wave, coming from the stone, looping outwards for a short distance, eventually forming a complete spiral, the same width as the fault, here seen in red. The energy is then released to a very low mound a short distance away, shown top right of this illustration of the boulder. The cup marks are basically a map of the energy circuits from this stone. This is the Highland Boundary Fault, running from Stranraer in the northeast to Arran in the southwest. Fault lines emit at least 5 types of emission which menhirs, both standing stones and cup-marked boulders, pick up, amplify, modify, and transmit across country. Using my divining rod, I followed no less than 5 circuits of energy across much of Perthshire from this boulder. Notice the inset, top right, which shows a line drawing of several cup marks which correspond to these energy circuits. It took me over 10 years, walking every weekend without fail, to rediscover the mystery of this boulder and many other aspects of these ancient stones and circles with my divining rod, which gave me an unique insight to so many puzzles, not only of the megaliths, but poltergeists, Geopathic stress, energy emitted from geological fissures, corrupt ley lines and burial grounds which have given health problems to so many people. I covered more than 3,000 miles of walking, as I realized that using this ancient art, similar to water divining, I could understand how our ancestors used standing stones and circles to transmit streams of natural energy through their burial grounds and homesteads. That will be yet another subject for my YouTube films in the near future. For the moment, the story is covered in my important book Ley Lines and Earth Energies, which is now, unfortunately, going out of print. These are the circuits which are important to this particular film and others to follow. It shows some of the elements which were used to mark this particular form of ley. They have some peculiar characteristics, these streams of energy. Unlike the straight leys which march across the hills without deviating, they contour them, but are attracted to locks, large and small, natural and man-made, like this one, called Karn Namaruv, the lock of the dead, as a funeral carrying a coffin chose the easiest route across its frozen surface, which gave way and drowned the mourners. These small locks attract this type of ley and allow them to travel across hilly country. One bitterly cold winter's day at St. Fillan's, I picked up one circuit of energy from the Conian boulder at the nose of a painted rock called the Serpent at St. Fillan's, Perthshire. This boulder has always been called, locally, the Crocodile, by those who are unaware of earth energies. It is a painted rock which had been carved, perhaps, during the Bronze Age or earlier, and I followed it up into the hills. That walk between the Serpent or Dragon at St. Fillan's and Loch Tay furnished me with some extraordinary characteristics of this type of energy, but again, that will have to wait. What I did discover, eventually, was that the Conaheen boulder emitted 5 or more roughly circular fields of energy across country, like the peel of an onion, but amazingly, they were focused into over 30 ancient churches surrounded by their burial grounds with some graves inside, as was the custom in these days. Puzzling, to say the least. Why did our ancestors spend so much effort in constructing such a labor-intensive and time-consuming construct? The only possible answer is that they were trying to access the spirits of their ancestors like so many ancient cultures did. If anyone can come up with a better theory, I would like to hear it. Our ancestors, as is well known, were terrified of ghosties, ghoulies and long-leggedy beasties, like the one-legged devil, who marched impossibly across the country, leaving a straight trail of one-legged footprints in the snow. The co-author of 2 of my books, Anne Silk, postulated that these footprints are warm earthquake waves bouncing between the frozen ground and the hard layer of ice covering the snow. Perhaps the people of old had every reason to be terrified of the dark forces, as they could have been constructs from their dead ancestors. Does that sound impossible? One discovery I made early on my endless treks across the hills of Perthshire was that this type of energy was attracted to cavities, like the many sheep and deer skulls left in the glens and hills after a hard winter. Another was that these circuits spiraled out from the boulder at Conian, wide coils at first, closing to less than a meter apart at the edge, the stream nicely encompassing each burial ground, with each old grave attracting at least one wave. When a new grave is dug and a coffin placed inside, however, these more powerful cavities attract the major share of waves. This explains the old Highland saying that the last person to be interred has to look after the previous ones until the next arrival. This is an illustration of how a resonant cavity attracts a wandering cup mark ley. The skull resonates and emits a shaped wave, perhaps for 100 meters around it. When a cup mark ley stream happens to touch the outside edge, only one wave shown here, it is automatically warped at 90 degrees into the center. When it reaches the opposite side, it resumes its original course. Certainly, the Christian Church destroyed many men here in an attempt to destroy the ancient religion. It looks now that they knew what they were doing, and justifiably so. There have been many cases of poltergeist activity across the United Kingdom, of course, like the Cage, in Oswith, Essex, in 1964, which was also aligned to a chain home radar station at Trimmingham 123 kilometers distant, hosting a Type 93 radar which may have been at least part of the problem. This was more active and seems to involve spirits, perhaps because the radar waves passed through a burial ground on its way, or perhaps because of the many unpleasant experiences this old jail suffered over the centuries. Dr. Logan said that an MRI scan he had in hospital sounded remarkably like the sounds he had heard in Virginia's house, which should have given him a clue to the effects which occurred around Virginia, whose own energies somehow attracted the radar waves. There was no evil entity, simply radar waves which were modified by a youngster going through puberty. This is an extension of the sound recording you heard earlier, made by Dr. Logan. You can hear the similarity to an MRI scanner and to the so-called Russian woodpecker, an over-the-horizon radar used to pick up aircraft at an extreme distance. This was built in Ukraine and could be heard on radios over much of the planet.
Here is a tape recording made by Dr. Logan. I think it was a force.
Dr. Logan also heard a rasping sound from her pillow. He mimics the sound by scratching on her pillow with his fingernails. And this is the sound an MRI scanner makes. And finally, the woodpecker over the horizon radar from Russia during the Cold War. The reality is rather mundane, but it may lead to the understanding of various phenomena like spontaneous human combustion, where an individual catches fire and is incinerated, usually leaving a part of the body, like this macabre picture of John Irving Bentley, who was burned to death on December 1966 at the age of 92 in the bathroom of his house in Coudersport, Pennsylvania. Poltergeist effects are known to create spontaneous fires in houses, so why not in a human who happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? And if you look at the picture, you will see that at the time of his death he would be standing in his Zimmer frame, 8 hollow metal tubes which could have attracted radar or similar waves and focused them into his body. Another common feature is their ability to make objects disappear and reappear, perhaps days later, which reminds me of the Philadelphia experiment in 1943 called Project Rainbow, when the United States Navy, according to some sources, made the destroyer USS Eldridge invisible, by encasing the ship in powerful electric fields, and teleporting it from Philadelphia to Norfolk, Virginia. Some claim that it vanished in a green glow, causing sailors to become fused into the ship's bulkheads or suffer severe mental illness when they returned. It is often referred to as a complicated hoax, but I have no doubt that the United States Navy has tried to make objects invisible in this manner, as they are known to have tried advanced multispectral camouflage and active cloaking technologies. They would have surely, at least, experimented in this field. Referring to Virginia's bedclothes changing color, it is likely that this was an optical illusion caused by the radar waves. The schoolroom door jamming can also be explained by radar, as they are known to expand metal. If this door had a metal kick plate at the base, it might have enlarged sufficiently to cause this effect. Also, of course, the hinges enlarging could have played a part. Objects, like the linen chest waddling across the room, can be explained. The linen chest and other resonant cavities could vibrate like a washing machine and move. Doors opening on their own are another common feature. Like the radar waves bouncing off Virginia's headboard, in this case they would be powerful enough to open doors, and likewise cupboards, even when they have been nailed shut, as happened to one house in Park Crescent. This house, to the left of Virginia's, is circled in yellow. The other house visited by the poltergeist was next door, to the east. Pictures on walls can be flung across the room, hollow objects explode, and people can be pushed downstairs simply by the pressure, or perhaps by the nerves in the back being triggered, as I vaguely recall an archaeologist sleeping in a dolmen, supposedly a Neolithic burial chamber, one night, being flung violently across the cavity and suffering some bruising. Radar waves are transverse, look like a child's slinky toy, and weave from side to side. I will leave it to experts to decide if they can physically turn water taps on and open doors, as seen so often in these cases, or by pressing handles. This may also explain the noise of footsteps following the frightened girls running downstairs. The chain home radar, as already mentioned, operated at 10 meters wavelength, which was short enough to pick up aircraft, but later in the Second World War, two scientists, John Randall and Harry Boot, discovered that if they bored 8 holes of a carefully calculated width in a copper block, they could reduce the wavelength down to 10 centimeters, which was small enough to be fitted into aircraft. This is the device they made, called a cavity magnetron. So many things in the poltergeist scene seem to focus on resonant cavities, houses or rooms like Park Crescent or even churches with their multicolored stained glass windows which may alter the emitted energy. Now I have to wonder if the cup marks carved by the Bronze Age people in boulders act like modern magnetrons. This is one boulder set in Dundurn churchyard which has two deep cavities. The larger emits a telluric wave which surrounds the entire church, while the smaller enters the church, loops around St. Fillan's grave and exits via a tiny window back to the stone. The Celtic cross featured here is another example of an ancient knowledge only recently explained by Crichton E. M. Miller, a working machine built of wood with the cross arm able to swivel and sitting on a turntable which could also swivel. It could map any celestial event very accurately. Crop circles can be included in this phenomena as most crops have hollow stems which can attract microwave energy and explain the sudden heating and bending of stalks at almost 90 degrees as well as the bursting of nodes similar to this illustration. Levitation of heavy objects often encountered in poltergeist attacks might also be worthy of attention as well as ball lightning which I have noticed is also attracted to resonant cavities. It is obvious as I have previously mentioned, that one trigger of poltergeist behavior is an adolescent, usually female, who can initiate these occurrences, especially if they live above an underground stream or geological fissure. A subterranean stream, if it is polluted, emits overlapping black spirals of energy down its length. An energy lay, if it is also polluted, passing across it from the right in this illustration, has each wave which touches the outer edge, warped 90 degrees into its center in a similar manner to a black spiral in a bed from a subterranean source, an underground stream or crossing geological fissures here shown in red, with the incoming waves from a lay in white for easier viewing like the energy field which surrounds a sheep's skull or any other resonant cavity. This will give an unhealthy black spiral. This illustration also shows a sheet of lead placed on the bed at the site of the illness which changed color under the influence of the unhealthy waves, an experiment done by one researcher. Unfortunately it became irradiated itself and was of no practical use. You can get more information in my website under geopathic stress. I also suspect that discarnate spirits can use these modern microwave energies to wreak havoc with the living. Is there any evidence of an evil spirit in the Saheye case? There doesn't appear to be one, but there is a chilling conclusion to this story. Extending the line from Park Crescent to the west, it travels through Bannockburn, where Scotland's Edward de Bruce led his army to defeat the English King Edward's army which lost an estimated 10 to 11,000 men in that area. We know, of course, that radar waves can return to source, but they do not simply bounce off solid objects. When they encounter an object, like an aircraft or ship, even a sailplane, the atoms shimmy and radiate in all directions. And to a lesser extent animals and birds do the same. During World War II, radar operators were perplexed by what they called angels on their screens. At dusk they could see radar returns spreading into cities, and in the morning leaving. These turned out to be starlings heading for the warmth of towns at night and leaving for the countryside to forage for food in the morning. Poltergeist phenomena has been frightening societies longer than the birth of radar waves, of course. I believe that it was the people of the Neolithic and Bronze Ages building their megalithic culture, the standing stones and circles like these near Comrie, 7 miles from Crieff. And even including the praying hands of Mary in Glen Lyon, Perthshire, which I encountered when following the Cup Mark Lay stream. Is this a natural outcrop or a form of standing stone? Looking through this split to the east I knew there were at least 3 ancient sites in line. Following this lay on foot to the west across Scotland to its source, the volcanic island of Staffa, I found another 7. Either an extraordinary coincidence or the work of our ancestors. The shells of energy from the Conahan Farm cup-marked boulder are different to straight lays. The energy from a standing stone is a standing wave, usually in the area I have been researching is 2.6 meters, amplitude 0.45 meters, while a cup-marked lay is much longer, 7.3 meters, amplitude 1.1 meter and has a cycle time of just under 2 minutes. Whereas standing stones are static, they do not weave. You can see in this illustration the Conahan Farm boulder resonating with the frequencies of the Highland boundary fault beneath it, forming the basic pattern of the circuits. Notice the boulder marked with the red arrow emitting its energy to be captured by the huge resonant cavity of the Druid's cave above. This is an old illustration showing some of the qualities of upmark energy. Notice the wave, bottom left, focused on the strange dog-headed standing stone, the bay cane, attributed to Fingal, then attracted to an empty drum, through a dry stone dike via a break in the wall, to a pylon, then a stone water trough and more poles. These poles, including large HT pylons, which have 4 pylons, have 4 waves to capture a cup mark lay. The lay eventually breaks off its captured route and returns to its original course. The wavelength of the chain home radar stations was slightly longer than this, from 10 to 15 meters, and I postulate that both types, ancient and modern, could cause a type of poltergeist phenomena. In addition, I discovered that, by accident, I could alter the wavelength from that cup-marked boulder, which was so extraordinary that I never wrote about it or talked about it, as I discovered I could shorten the wavelength, increased energy, simply by thinking of someone who had passed on, although concentrating on someone still alive had no effect. In addition, the longer that person had been dead, the longer this phenomenon took to occur. Very strange, and only on a cup mark lay. You can read about it in detail now on my website, as it is important to understand how and why our ancestors were manipulating these energies. It may have been these ancient people who were responsible for the poltergeist infestations, leading up to the Christian era, where the Church, afraid of discarnate spirits and creatures of the underworld, began to demolish this old knowledge. As you can see again in this illustration of the chapel at Dundurn, they must have been trying in this instance, to access the spirit of Saint Philin the leper or stammerer who was interred here along with other powerful locals. What other reason would they use the energy from these 2 cup marks from this small standing stone to surround the chapel and his grave? Is it not strange that the sages of old buried their dead beneath churches? That will be explained in my next YouTube film. The Church actively destroyed standing stones or even Christianized them by carving a cross on one face. This is such a stone in Glen Lyon called St. Onan's stone. Carved for a different reason, though. When the bubonic plague tore its grim way up the glen, the saint gathered his flock around him on their knees near here and prayed, "Let the devil's pestilence come neither east or west." And the plague did stop. It turned and bored its way into a nearby boulder, according to legend. But that boulder already had a hole bored in it, a cup mark. Intriguing. Is it possible that he used his knowledge of energy lays to earth a corrupt ley line? Perhaps elves, goblins, the fairy people, and the other spirits were very real, and it would explain why the Christian Church put in so much effort to destroy this ancient knowledge. Many people have had really bad experiences with apparent poltergeist behavior, some even driven to suicide. If they knew that in at least some cases there were no evil spirits, simply radar or similar waves, they could have avoided such stress. The health aspects of living in such an environment is another matter. Onan stone again. Another caprice of nature, or a standing stone carved in the likeness of a person witnessing the effects of a cruel plague on his family and friends? It may be possible for anyone unfortunate enough to being attacked by such energies to attract these energies and ground them out of harm's way, as explained on my website, but this is only a theory based on my work with some types of ill health, and, again, you will find more on my website, leylinesexplained.com, but I will have to leave it to others to evolve this work. For several years now I have enjoyed writing articles about my very strange research, occasionally receiving hysterical and very rude replies which encouraged me to respond with pictures and illustrations which are undeniable, like this picture of Crieff with the sun setting at the foot of King Street on the winter solstice, passing over Dumbarton Castle, a powerful volcanic plug, the seat of kings. Hence King Street. Despite my research, I must agree that radar-type waves cannot explain many infestations, and there is a deeper and darker side to this fascinating problem. This work is unique, as, to my knowledge, no one else has mapped the ley structure in this manner. Even after several decades of writing 4 books and internet exposure, no one planet-wide seems to have the time or the interest to follow this fascinating work. The problem is likely to be, in part, that I had the good fortune to grow up in Perthshire, was a keen hill walker, and much of the area around my town is wild, with many standing stones and cup-marked boulders generally undisturbed by human hand, with these very subtle energies still working in roughly the same way as our ancient geomancers intended. Here are a few pictures I have taken in the past of the land I walked across in my efforts to understand the ley system. I have a number of YouTube films of my life's work. On your browser write David Cowan, ley lines, YouTube for these. Peter Law has an excellent video on this subject and Malcolm Robertson has a book, called The Saheye Poltergeist which explores the incident in detail.